Hello and welcome to Brisbane Now. Imagine having 17,500 people under your watch every single day. When you wake up in the morning, what's the day going to look like and how it ends can change every single day at a drop of a hat. My next guest is the Police Commissioner, Katarina Carroll. Commissioner Carroll, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's taken a long time for us to get together over the last few months. You're a busy lady, so I really appreciate your time and thanks for your patronage.
Well, is it because of my diary or your diary?
Oh, your diary.
Oh, it was my diary.
Absolutely, yeah. So, look, you've got a very busy job. As I said, you take care of a lot of people under your watch in that as well. How did becoming a police officer or in the police force, how did that come about?
I went to boarding school when I was 12 years old, a Catholic boarding school run by Mercy Sisters and all girls. And two of my best friends had fathers who were police officers, both from really small country towns. One was Mount Surprise and the other one was Ravensone. I used to spend time with them during the weekends. And I really enjoyed the time that they spent with community, how they interacted with community. And from about 15 years of age, I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. And funnily enough, I never went back to small town policing because I did many other things, but I was attracted to it at quite an early age.
Now, let's go back to it at a very early age in that as well. Your mum and dad, Ivan and Antonia, Bosnian Croat parents, found their way into Australia over to living on a tobacco farm in Hot Springs, 153 k's southwest from Cairns. How do they find themselves there?
Interesting. You know, many people think, we look at people and we think, oh, wow, they've got interesting, exciting lives. But I look at what my parents, their lives and what many of them went through at that time. They came over very poor on a boat like many people did in the late 50s and 60s. Didn't know the language. But all they knew is they wanted to create a better life for themselves and a better life for their family. They had a choice of countries when they were in refugee camp in Germany, and they chose Australia. And I always, say to my parents, why Australia? Because it was the furthest away. So they ended up in Sydney, worked for a few years, and because my father had been involved in tobacco in Croatia, he made his way to far north Queensland, and I had an older brother born in Sydney. I was born in Innisfail, and my younger brother was born in Herberton, and that's how we ended up on a tobacco farm.
That's really interesting. I suppose there was no Google back then, of course. It was basically how to get, and that's really interesting, get the furthest away from the homeland as possible. Isn't that interesting? Yes.
When you grow up for them, which was an oppressive life, very little education, communism, very poor, from such poverty, that they thought, how do we have a better life for ourselves? They escaped over the border into a country that took them in as refugees and got on this massive ship with many other people who did exactly the same.
Isn't it amazing? We complain about not having enough, we don't watch a TV series back to back, or we miss out on a bus or something, but the hard life back in those days to get to a better life.
Yes, and I often think about even my childhood, and we spent many years working on that farm, making a better life for ourselves alongside each other, on tractors, hoeing in fields, picking tobacco, and wondering whether you're going to bring the crop in and wondering whether you're going to have enough money for that, crop next year. I think what my parents went through and what was instilled in us at a young age, I think it really gives you that work ethic and that resilience to, survive and strive in many ways.
And what are good memories back in those days?
Yes, it was a wonderful upbringing. We didn't have much initially. My children think it's hilarious that we were that poor, that my first bathtub was also my bed. Mum would wipe it out and put a little mattress in, and that's where I'd actually sleep. And they would say, Mum, you're kidding. I said, I'm not kidding, sweetie. Yep. That's what life was like. But it was a very independent life. We drove motorbikes and cars and bikes at a very young age out of need, but also that gave us a great freedom, a great independence, physically strong. We ran around the farm, rode through the bushes, and I think of it as a life that was, hardworking, but also a wonderful upbringing.
And you talked about some of your family friends and young kids you knocked about with their parents were police officers. So you said before that they were giving back to the community. And did you find it, and I know people roll their eyes with this terminology, it was a bit of a calling when you first saw what the police were doing? And because there would have been a bit of angst from parents as well, from your parents coming from a communist country over, about the police. Were they a bit suspicious of police back in those days?
Yeah, so two parts to that. Yes, it is a calling, and I know people actually roll their eyes at that, but that's what attracted me to it. I watched them interact with young people. I watched them make a difference, and that's what really attracted me to the role. But for my parents, policing in communist countries back then is very, very different to what it is now. It was so difficult for them to accept initially that that's what I wanted to do. And in fact, they were, I would say, quite appalled by it and questioned me many times. Is that the right thing? Is this really your calling? And over a few years, I went to university straight after boarding school for a couple of years, and they accepted it. And obviously we're very proud, of what I achieved over the years, because they could see that policing is very different in this, modern contemporary world of ours. But what really knocked it out of the field was my brother joined 3 years later. So they had no choice but to accept the fact that there was going to be a policing family.
Come along for the ride, Mum and Dad. That's exactly right. Now, you joined the force in 1983, working in general duties, then became a detective in the drug squad. Now, the 1980s would have been a very interesting time around. Obviously, things we know about, things we don't know about, things you know about, all that kind of stuff and that as well. Do you look back at those times and think, geez, it is a very different time, but do you think, how did people survive back in those days? And big difference, isn't there?
Oh, goodness me, definitely. It's funny, I was just catching up with someone today, and we were talking about how different our life was in the 80s, how different policing was. I have a very unusual, I think, start to being a detective in plain clothes. I went to the office that started the Fitzgerald inquiry.
Yep.
At the licensing branch, some 2 weeks before the Four Corners program that exposed, what happened there. And thankfully, that timing was right for me, because the organisation changed considerably. We went on to become highly educated, contemporary, modern practices. So I look back and think about, it was some of the worst time in our history, but what came out of it was just terrific. We went on to be, one of the most modern policing organisations in the world.
Learnings, I suppose, is it? You learn from the mistakes of past.
Extraordinary learnings, and those learnings are still there. We still refer to those days. We still learn from those days, and I think you should never forget that, and always have it in the back of your mind when you're, making the decisions about the future.
I know when we speak to younger people these days and all that kind of stuff, and talk about the olden days and that as well, I think there's good. There's a lot of value in that kind of thing. I talk to a lot of young people, say what it used to be like, and they go, "Oh yeah," but I think if you don't learn from those kind of mistakes or those kind of learnings, then what's the point of it?
What's the point of it? And if you don't learn from it and are always, thinking about it, it's dangerous. You could take the foot off the pedal and you end up, in those dark days again. So it's incredibly important that you're always learning and that you're always looking to the future, being more contemporary, seeing what's happening across the world. That's what makes you a better organisation.
Yeah, tell you what, I always talk as well about, thank goodness, well, from my perspective, no social media back in those days, because I tell you what, there would have been a lot of unemployment for us older people these days, because no evidence back then.
It's true,
Yep.
The world has changed.
Yep.
In some ways, our younger people, it's tough, because you are more highly scrutinised. You can't, that first, profile you put on digital media platforms is there forever. And it's very difficult to undo some of that damage. So it was a very different era. You didn't have mobile phones. You had to dial a local exchange to be put through to your...
See all the young blokes here now, people who are going, what are you talking about, don't you?
I say to my daughter, why don't you phone your friend? And she says, Mum, we don't phone, we text or Snapchat. And so that... It is a very different world.
When I used to live overseas, you had to ring 001166, and if you stuffed it up, you had to start all over again and that as well. So.
Yes, I've done that a few times over the years.
Tell me, the 80s and the 90s are a very, very defining era, obviously, of the police force and that as well. Is there anything that really stood out to you over that time? And I probably put you on the spot there. Anything that really probably changed your your course of your mindset of policing back in those days? Was there a particular time?
So I must say, and the reason why I say the Fitzgerald era, because I was in licensing branch and then went to the drug squad, and that was my detective career. But I was very quick with a very close group friends of mine, to realise that we had to become better educated, that we had to, change how we were as an organisation. So whilst I already had some tertiary qualifications, I was in a group that then went on to get our degrees and our masters, and then really strategise where we would go in the organisation to not only benefit ourselves but to make the organisation a better place. And it's really interesting when you attach yourself to that group of people, and sometimes, and I think that was almost accidental, it just worked out that way, but that group of people went on to achieve great things internally as well as externally. One of them is a barrister, others went on to be assistant commissioners, one of them is still a close colleague of mine who's, done it in the organisation, and it is a very senior. So that was a turning point for me personally, but for also that group that I was involved in. We kind of fed off each other.
This might go a little bit left of field here, and that when you win the drug side of it back in those days, is there a big difference to the drug trade in this? I'm really interested to see what has changed over the years. Is it obviously different drugs these days compared to back then, or has been a lot changed over the years?
Definitely, more drugs.
More drugs, yeah.
More information on how to make them. Greater cartels across the world that produce more, that infiltrate. We are a lucrative market. They take advantage of that. Better ways for them to communicate. It's borderless. Mm-hmm. It's borderless. They do not work within rules and the law, whereas all policing organisations and law enforcement do. Mm-hmm. So it certainly is a lot more complex, and they're extraordinarily savvy in the way they do business. But if you were to kind of wrap it up, there are more drugs, more different types of drugs, and some of them are far less expensive to make as well. So it is, it's in some ways as a parent, I find it terrifying. And then as a commissioner of police and a police officer, our responsibility, and I was at a conference the other day having this exact discussion. We have extraordinary responsibility to work across law enforcement across Australia and the world to make sure that we can stop these people from infiltrating part of that whole system.
Yeah, I just find it interesting over the years of development of the access to particular drugs back in the 80s and 90s compared to now, and you see what's out there now. And I was just found it. Yeah, it's always been around, but it's just obviously the accessibility, the volume, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
It's certainly a challenge for policing across the world, and we have great partners. We work with the FBI, we work with our international partners, our local partners. We are all in this together, and we've got to be, because the world has become so small in so many ways. It's so borderless. When you and I were probably travelling in the 80s, it was a big thing to hop on a plane and, go overseas. Well, now it's not a big thing. The connectivity is just there, and there's so many ways that you can communicate. So it is a challenging environment, but I know from the work that we're involved in, others, that we are all dedicated to make sure that we reduce that demand and that supply.
Yeah, definitely. Now, skipping forward to a long skip now, 2008, you were awarded the Australian Police Medal in the Australia Day Honours, awarded by the Governor-General. Now, I know when I bring these kind of awards up, and I talk to people about them, and I've done a few over the time and that as well, you would probably say, look, that's just part of the job, and awards are just something, blah, blah. That is a big, for us normal people, with respect there, that's a really big deal. And do you go home at night and you must be proud, and the family and everyone's got to be proud of those kind of achievements?
Yeah, the family are, and in a way, you're definitely proud, because in policing, it's not as if, you get a bonus because you've run a profit or something. It is things that, when you're recognised, they're the nice things, in the work that you do. And you are proud, and probably more so the family. The family are a big part of it, of course.
Yeah.
I don't achieve anything without the family, and we kind of own it together. But you don't undertake this work and do what you do because you think you're going to get an award. That's kind of the bonus, and in many times you don't even expect it.
Very, very true. And isn't it amazing, all the awards and everything? You talk to Olympians, you talk to the other bit with all their awards everywhere. It's this is an award. I do this for what I want to do. Whereas us who, an awards are nice to get a pat on the back now
It's
and then.
funny,
isn't it?
when you look at all of, what I wear on this tunic, when my children were younger, they'd go, Mum, what are all those things? I said, it says that Mum is tired and she's getting old. That's all I can say to you.
That's perfect. Yeah. So just listen to what I say. And then zip forward again. 2014 and beyond, very big year for yourself.
Yes.
Operations Commissioner of the G20 Summit now. I did a bit of research, a bit of a reading on the G20 Summit. That would have been an absolute logistical puzzle, nightmare, all those words there, and yourself in front of the operations there. So what was that like? And that would have been a big step up to, geez, there's a lot of things going on.
It was the largest peacetime operation in Australia's history. To have 26, so even though it's called G20, the Prime Minister gets to invite others. So there was 26 world leaders. And that group is the most powerful and largest, economies in the world. For those 2 days that they were here to discuss, world economic issues, it's tough, 2 days. And the planning took 2 years. And we had something like 7,000 police, several thousand security officers, 1,000 defence. And you're right, there's millions of working parts. So the logistics are just extraordinary. There will be hundreds and thousands of motorcade movements, tens and thousands of flights for the staff. So everything has to be lined up perfectly to come together for those 2 days. It was my birthday on the Monday after that. And I've got to say, I was very, very happy to see them all leave Brisbane.
And especially that your grand final leaves that second day, everyone's out safe. And that's amazing. And again, you don't see what goes on behind that. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I did read a few articles here and there about, security and all that kind of stuff. And maybe a motorcade might want to take a little bit longer and all that kind of stuff. And you don't, because it's a human aspect, isn't it?
Yes.
When people change it, then all of a sudden plan B, C and D and where are you?
And that's exactly right. So you have those contingencies for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
You will have a contingency in place if one motorcade takes 5 minutes, because if everyone took 5 minutes, your program's behind 2-3 hours. So there's always contingencies. And I've got to say, it was probably, whilst you've experienced a lot of pressure in your career, that was probably the most difficult period of my life, because the whole of the world was watching Brisbane, Australia. The host was Prime Minister and Cabinet, so you had to work across government. And I remember a week out from the event, Courier Mail did this big story on me, and the last paragraph read something along the lines of, if she succeeds, there'll be whispers about her going on to be a commissioner. If she fails, she'll spend more time along the sidelines watching her kids play soccer. And all I could think was, wow. And I thought, well, that's spot on, isn't it?
Jeez, no in between there. There's black and white, isn't it? There's no grey.
I thought that was spot on. So there was a bit of pressure. And was it successful? Yes.
Well,
but would we have done things differently? Definitely. You only learn some things along the way, and there are many things I would have changed.
Yeah, and I suppose you need to have 15 tabs open in your brain, or even more than 15, 20, 30, 40 tabs. And during that time there, those years ahead, getting up to the event, can you switch off? And I'll talk about this a bit later on about other things. Can you switch off, or is it basically you're on 24/7? Because I think anyone thinking for many, many different scenarios, have you got the ability to switch off?
Switching off is very difficult. I took about a week's leave in that period of time, and the only reason you can't take more, because so many things are happening. It's so large, and you touched on it. There's just like these millions of little things going on that even if you take an extended period, you're that far behind, where the planning is. So it is incredibly difficult to switch off. And even if you take a week off, you're still thinking about that. You're still being called over planning issues, logistical issues, briefings. So it's a time that you just put aside. You've got to get through it, and then when you get to the other end, that's where you get to relax a little bit.
Oh, there you go.
Exactly.
From there as well, yeah. So that's so. When you said that statement from the Courier Mail before, then you joined the new Queensland Fire and Emergency, acting as Commissioner.
Yes.
In 2015, or then officially appointed in 2015. Did that role give you that little bit of fire then, I want to go for the police job? Or is that like the succession plan, or how does that work?
No, interestingly, no, not at all. So what happened was when I finished the G20, a new department was formed, Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. There was a lot of mogging, machinery or government changes when the Newman era came in.
Yep.
So a new department had a review and they wanted to adjust a few things and, undertake a program of reform. So I had a phone call from the Premier to undertake this role and I agreed to go over. And that was a tough call because I'm not a firefighter. I had just finished, doing this big policing role. And it's very difficult to say no to a Premier. It could be, it's very difficult, let me tell you. So off I went to Fire and Emergency Services and I was the police officer for the first 6 months until I resigned and they advertised the position and I got the commissioner's role. It was different type of work to policing, very different. And the agency, rightfully so, I think found it difficult to adjust because I really was an outsider. So it took many months of getting to know the culture, the people, the issues, and genuinely putting that great leadership team together. I had a great team, and I go back to G20, the success of what you do is all about the team. And we led that organisation for the next 4 or 5 years in such a unified way. And I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. But I never thought, you don't think, oh my God, I'm going, this is going to set me up for something else. You're just so busy in the thick of it. And it was a massive piece of work. And if Ian Stewart had decided to retire earlier, there was just no way I would have even put in for the position because I'd only been there for 2.5, 3 years. But he stayed on a little bit, and by the time he had left, I'd been at QFES for 4.5 years. And I thought, okay, if I don't apply now, the opportunity's gone forever. And I have been here for 4.5 years, and it kind of, that's just how it landed.
Perfect. It's a bit of sliding doors moment.
Bit
there
of
you go.
sliding doors.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So and I still remember, and we were at an event in 2019. I remember that you were just appointed, I think, and we had an event, and then Police Commissioner Carroll's here and all that kind of stuff. And so in 2019. So when you get a job like that, is it kind of like anyone getting a new job? You think, oh my God, and go home and tell the family, have a bit of a cheer here and there and everywhere, or is it kind of like, police commissioner now? How does it work at your end?
I've never been asked that question before, dear. When I look back, publicly there was this kind of a different feel to it because I was a female and it hadn't happened before. And people will, say to me, oh, what's it like being the first female commissioner? I think firsts are important, incredibly important for society because, we've seen that across the world. Someone who achieves the first, tends to take the society forward, etc. But for me, it was just, I'd worked all my life to just go to that next step. And this was that next step. I moved my family around the country, around the state, who supported me heavily. And it was a whole family celebration. So we went out that night. I had a barbecue in the backyard where we lived, and my brothers came over and his family. So it was a kind of a big family thing. And whilst you celebrate that, I never overly celebrate because these roles, they're tough gigs, and you got your work cut out for you. So it is an achievement. It's one that's owned by the entire family, and you kind of think, well, here we go again, because I just come out of 4.5 years of reform in another big organisation, and here we go again in this one.
I asked this question of a number of people. I interviewed when the Wallaby coach, Dave Rennie, many years ago, when he first got appointed. And I always asked, when you first walk in the front door for the first day, been appointed police commissioner, he was appointed Wallabies coach, you go in the office for the first day, what do you do? You shut the door and have a little bit of a scratch. I know you probably wouldn't, but I was watching Love Actually when the Prime Minister, Hugh Grant walks in and he just doesn't know what to do in the first day. It's kind of like, I know you've probably, it's your position there and that as well, but that must be like hang on a second, reality maybe kicks in.
reality does kick
Yeah.
in, but it's different in different roles. And I'll give you an example. So when I went to QFES, I barely knew anyone in the executive leadership team. I knew one or two people, and I came in there under probably slightly controversial circumstances. So that really was, I walked into the office kind of feeling so lonely, first thing, get your head around this, get your deputies in, have a discussion about the future, get the executive leadership team in. And when I went back to policing, I'd already had, I suppose, a set way of doing that. But going back to policing was like actually going home because I knew everyone. And I knew my system and how I was going to do this. So it was almost a little bit more natural and well practiced. But certainly going from G20 into QFES, I found those first few weeks extraordinarily challenging to, rally the team, set the vision, talk, just get everything in place. And then it's what you make of it at the end of the day. And I think you feel lost sometimes, depending on the circumstances, and other times you're like, yeah, I've just got to go for it.
Yep. Yeah. Because I suppose every single day your job would be completely different. We are in an office every day and, I think we can control that. But as I said at the start, 17,500 staff, you dealt with floods, fires, youth crime, internal issues. Your picture gets plastered all over newspapers, your social media. People have got their own opinion and all that kind of stuff. And we all know what social media is like. It's an absolute cesspit at times and that as well. And the ongoing stress of making Queensland safe. Does that get I know we spoke about it before, and I was part of the job, but as a mum, as a wife, as a human being, when you see all this bad, you obviously hear more than us regular people hear about. Do you take that home with you, and what could be that kind of that just a step away maybe from being the commissioner for hopefully a couple of hours?
Yeah, it's interesting. I often say to my staff, and if we did a Netflix series on what happened in my office on a daily basis, I think the audience would say, oh, you've got to be joking, that doesn't happen. We see everything.
Yeah.
We see in one day what most people would not see in their entire lives. And you see the worst of it and you see the best of it. And there are days and weeks that stand out in your mind that you will never, ever get over in many ways, and all the organisation. Some of our major crises, Hannah Clark's death, our two police officers that passed away, Dave Masters that passed away, so Matt, Rachel and Dave, they are big events that have such a profound impact on people. And then there is the other side where there is this, because you're the face of it, you're the head of the organisation, you're the CEO, and particularly in policing, you are plastered, everywhere. And the digital, the people, we call them, I think a lot of people do, keyboard, warriors sometimes, they're anonymous, but they actually do say hurtful things, and a lot of it's uninformed. And when it does not, I don't know if I would say it affects me, it kind of upsets me sometimes that people say such awful things when they don't know the context, they don't know what went into the decision making. It's difficult. There are some weeks that are very, very difficult, and there are other weeks that you think, well, I know exactly why I'm in this role. We're on the path. We've got our strategy in place. We've got our vision in place. Our organisational vision is, making Queensland the safest place, and everything sits around that. I have a great team. We have amazing people in the organisation. And that's what makes you feel proud to represent them and be ahead of what is a great organisation.
Yeah, excellent. I think it's, the keyboard warriors are just a waste of time, aren't they? Now, I've got a question. Like in Batman, there's a red phone to the commissioner. Like, have you got a phone? Is there a number that pops? Is there a number that pops up on your phone, and when you see it, you think, oh no. I don't want to know the number, of course. No, is it like, there's something?
Yes, there is.
Okay, that's all I need to know. That's all I need to know.
Yes, there is. But interestingly, oh, goodness me, in G20 it was worse, actually. There was this phone that if it rang, that means all hell had broken loose, the ADF were coming in. We had all of these contingencies in place that if there was a terrorist attack, this is what we were going to do. And our comms was coming through this phone,
Yep.
a landline, secure comms. and it's like, God, I hope that phone doesn't ring.
Is it like the old Western movies? Everyone goes quiet when the phone rings.
Yes. So there is still, but if there's one phone that I definitely didn't want to ring was back in G20, that phone that we knew if it rang, well, we were in a lot of trouble.
It wasn't like the old day where you could take it off the hook and they can't ring in anyway.
No, not at all.
Not at all. So when you, and another one about yourself and that, Katarina, what do you switch off? Is there something you go to? Do you know, if I've had a stressful day at work, I wouldn't mind watching an episode of Maths, you know, that's my bit of my guilty pleasure, or something, as a middle-aged guy saying that's a bit weird, I know. Is there anything you switch off? Is there anything you like to do? And I ask a lot of my guests that, about what do you do to kind of maybe switch off? Is it TV? Is it whatever?
So I'll go for a walk every so often, you know, on the weekends mostly. Switching off is with family and friends, really, that you aren't constantly, you know, thinking about work. And even then it's difficult because, like I was thinking last night, I got home from an event and I'm on the phone and my husband starts speaking to me. He said, well, I'm not going to start talking to you until you finish with the phone. And I said, well, I've just got to get back this text for work. That's quite common.
Yeah.
That's quite common. So there are many small things, you know, it's going out with your friends, it's going for a walk, it's spending time with family. And I think you touched on it before. Do you take things home to your family? Sometimes I do, because that's an area that I can, you know, talk to my husband if I've had a tough day, and my family. So I think you've got to use whatever works for you. You know, I have senior people who are so diligent at going to the gym every morning and go, well, that's not me, I've got to tell you. That's why I go for a walk every so often. So I think you've just got to use whatever it is in this chapter of your life to make it as easy as you can, you know, in particularly in that difficult part. But I like a glass of wine in the evening. That's my relaxing period. I like, you know, we went out with friends on the weekend to just a brew bar. It was only an hour and a half, but it was wonderful. So I think you've got to try and balance it. It's not easy, but it does get you through. And people say, you know, it's such a, you know, difficult, you know, job, and it's, you know, how do you get it? It's a chapter in your life. You know, I used to be a great book reader. I used to love reading novels. I never read a novel. I read so much. That's the last thing I want to do. But I'm hoping that in the next chapter I'll get to read a lot of novels.
So in wrapping up, I think I find it very interesting that no matter what we do outside in the world, you're the police commissioner, I run a business, other people do this, go home to your children at night time, and I know your kids are a little bit older in that as well, so am mine, and you tell them something and you ask them 5, 6, 10 times, and sometimes you think, I've got 17,500 people. I was a police commissioner. I was you know, the Australian Financial Review, 100 most influential women in 2019. I know you probably never say that. But listen to me, pick up your dirty clothes, and the kids just think you're your mum. I'm dad. They don't care, do they?
Well, you know, joking, I'd say, do you know who I am? They go, your mum. And I said, that's exactly right, I'm mum, and you should listen to me.
One phone call, I can get everyone. No, I just said, your kids don't care outside the world. You're just mum, I'm just dad, and that's basically it.
And that's spot on. I think people think it's not like that, but it is like that. Yep. You grow up in this family, which, and I always say this, it's an average family. Yep. We go and do sports, we go out, we do chores, we laugh, we eat together, sometimes we don't. Yep. We're not good at sitting around a table having dinner, let me tell you. It's always on a couch, sitting there chatting to it. But, you know, that's what it's about. Yep. It's about your family, your partner, making it the best go of it you can, basically.
Look, I'm really grateful of your time here today, Commissioner. It's been a sensation. I know it's taken a while. I'm really glad that you've got some time to get to know who you are in that as well. Like I said, we see you on the TV, we see all this stuff, and getting to know you in that as well, and just a little bit of your life in that as well. And I think, you know, you've got one of the, if not toughest jobs around, all the stuff going on in the world. But I thank you, and I know a lot of people thank you very much for what you do, and everyone out there. So, Commissioner Carroll, thank you for joining me.
Absolute pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.